Hello, History of St. Louis, and welcome to the first lesson of the semester. Today we tackle the question, what's in a name? And so we're going to take a look at how the places in the Midwest got their names. If you've ever wondered, where did we get the name Missouri? Where did we get the name Mississippi? Where did we get the name Merrimack? And other names like that, we're going to answer the questions today, how those places got their names. So for the notes for this PowerPoint, you're just going to have to take notes either manually or digitally, but there is no note page that I am providing or that the teacher is providing. So you're just going to have to do this on your own. You can either handwrite your notes or type them up, whatever is most convenient for you. This lesson starts with a look at one of the first groups to live in the Midwest area. They are known historically as the Hopewell Indians or Hopewell Native Americans. And the Hopewell are most historically known for developing one of the largest cities in the world at the time that they were in existence, from about 500 BC to about 1200 AD. Their city was eventually known as Cahokia. We believe that this is not the name that they called it. We believe that it's the name that the Indians or the Native Americans that came after the Hopewell called it. And so we're not sure necessarily that what the name was, but we know that historically it's been known as Cahokia, and so that's what name has stuck ever since. For those who know the St. Louis area, we know that just across the river is Cahokia, and what Cahokia is most known for are the man-made earthen structures that we know as mounds. And so these Hopewell slash Cahokian Indians, or Cahokian Native Americans, were famous for making mounds. And not only were they in the Illinois side, we're going to prove here in just a second that they also built on the St. Louis side of the Mississippi River as well. There are three reasons why the mounds were made. And so at this time, if the teacher wants to pause and lead a little discussion along with the group, you can go ahead and do so. What were the three reasons why mounds were built by the Hopewell Indians? Okay, so here are the answers. Number one, and these are in no particular order. Number one, and probably most notably, they were used as burial grounds. So the remains of the natives were buried into the mounds themselves, and then as the mounds got bigger and bigger, they could contain more and more remains of people. So number one would be burials. Number two would be protection. They wanted those mounds up high so that they could see the surrounding areas. They could see whether or not their enemies and rivals would be planning an attack or approaching them. And so it gave them basically a 360-degree view of the area. And some of these mounds obviously were quite large, so that it gave them a good vantage point from all around. And then if your opponents did attack, you would be basically fighting uphill or on high ground, and your opponents would be on low ground, which is a much less it's a worse place to be when you're fighting. And then third, these mounds were used for religious or governmental buildings. And so the buildings that were on top of these large mounds obviously had a major importance to the civilization, either politically or religiously. And so those just signified the major buildings for the Cahokian Native Americans. So those are your three reasons why the mounds were built. And so obviously the Cahokian natives were known as mound builders. This is what we believe the civilization looked like and what Cahokia looked like. It's believed that there was close to about 10,000 people that lived in the Cahokia area, which at that time from 500 BC to about 1200 AD would have made it one of the largest cities in the world. We know that this was a huge metropolis for that time period. And you can see the large mound and buildings right in here, and then you would have had a wall surrounding the city, and then you would have had smaller mounds around the outskirts of it, again, for all sorts of different reasons. Here's another vantage point or another possibility of what things might have looked like. If you're thinking to yourself, this looks a little bit like the Aztec and Mayan civilizations, you would be correct. I think they all sort of utilize the same architecture. And then, as I said before, St. Louis also had mounds in the downtown area, basically right around where the old Edward Jones football dome is today. That North St. Louis city area had about 27 mounds, and this is the largest of those mounds. It was close to 300 feet tall at its height. That would be about halfway up the Gateway Arch today. For those of you who are asking, where are those mounds and what happened to them? Well, as the city expanded and we needed that property for our city to grow and expand, we had to basically destroy the mounds. So they literally took shovels and wheelbarrows and just started breaking these large mounds down to where they literally were, there was nothing left. And so the dirt was used either for fill, and the remains of the Native Americans, because they were natives, were just thrown away. And so unfortunately, we lost a lot of architecture or archaeological histories by the destruction of these mounds. And the Native Americans obviously lost the burials of many loved ones from this destruction. And so there is a video that's going to be optional for students to watch. There is a memorial to this mound that is in downtown St. Louis, and the video talks a little bit about where it is and what it looks like. So I highly suggest that students take a look at that video. It's a little bit of interesting history of St. Louis. And by the way, because we had so many mounds in downtown St. Louis, initially St. Louis's first nickname was Mound City. Before we were known as the Gateway to the West, we were known as Mound City because of all the mounds. Obviously, most of the remnants of those mounds today are on the Illinois side of the river. This is Cahokia Mounds. This is the largest one that is in Cahokia today. This is Monk's Mound. Monk's Mound is about 100 feet tall. And so the St. Louis one would have been basically triple the size of this one, to give you an idea of just how large ours was. But this is the centerpiece of the Cahokia Mounds today, Monk's Mound. This is a little map that shows us where mounds were built in the St. Louis area. As you can see, this is the St. Louis downtown area, right where my arrow is. And so this is basically just about where the old Edward Jones Dome is. And then if you cross over into Illinois, here's the Cahokia Mounds right here. And then you can see that there were other major mound complexes to the east and the northeast of St. Louis in this area. And then you also see that there was something in the northwest corner of Forest Park. So I'm not sure really what that was, but this map does highlight that there was some activity in both Forest Park and in the downtown area. And these are the mounds downtown that gave St. Louis the nickname Mound City. So now we shift ahead in history to just after Columbus comes to the Americas. The first European to the Midwest area was Hernando de Soto. He basically comes about 50 years after Columbus. He first arrives in Florida. He's looking for the fountain of youth, and he's looking for gold. And as you can see, his travels takes him all the way around Florida, into Georgia, into South Carolina, then into Tennessee, then into Alabama and Mississippi. And then when he makes his way basically to Arkansas, he runs into what he is known for, which is he is the first European to discover the Mississippi River. And that happens in 1541. He does not call it the Mississippi River. He is Spanish, so he's going to call it El Rio de Espiritu Santo, or the River of the Holy Spirit. He goes on then to peruse all around Arkansas and goes into a little bit of Texas before he makes his way back to the Mississippi River area, and he dies somewhere near the river, and his body is actually dumped into the Mississippi River, and so his remains are somewhere either in the Mississippi River or probably today somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico. But he is the first European that discovers. Notice how I did not say he is the first to find, because natives had known about it for some time, but he is the first to discover for Europeans the Mississippi River. And so if you know anything about St. Louis and the St. Louis area, I believe just south of St. Louis, southwest of St. Louis, is the city of DeSoto, and that is named after Hernando de Soto right here. And remember that he is Spanish. Now, fast forward a little bit, and you have two Europeans, but this time from French Canada, coming down from the north, who will run into the Mississippi River, and their names are Louis Joliet. He is this gentleman right here, and then Father Jacques Marquette, who is this gentleman right here. And so they traveled down from French Canada and pick up the Mississippi River at its beginnings or near its beginnings in the upper Midwest of the United States, and basically follow it down almost halfway, pretty much halfway down the river. As they are making their way down the Mississippi River, they get to about the area that we know today as Alton, Illinois, and they come across some Native Americans who are friendly and basically warn them not to go any further because of a monster that they had referred to as the Piasaw. And basically, the legend of the Piasaw is this. The Piasaw is a collection of animals. It has the antlers of a deer. It has sort of the mouth of a lion or tiger. It has a long tail like a lizard. It has the claws of like an eagle. It is scaly and is winged. And basically, the natives were afraid of this Piasaw legend eating men. We also know that in this area there was similar legends known as the Thunderbirds. These were, again, large birds that would eat men. But basically what we see is that Joliet and Marquette are warned not to go any further. Obviously they do, but the Piasaw legend is very big in Alton, Illinois. The picture that I'm showing you here is painted on the bluffs of Alton that overlook the Mississippi River at Alton. And this is actually a recreation of an earlier mural that was probably painted in the late 50s. And this is the newest version of it. It hasn't changed very much over the years. But the Piasaw legend is one that is very well known in the Alton, Illinois area. And your homework tonight is going to be to read an article about this legend here. Marquette and Joliet basically get to what is today Arkansas, and then they head back up to French Canada. So they are not the first ones to travel the whole river. That would be these two gentlemen right here, De La Salle and De Tonty. And in 1682, They are known for traveling the entire length of the Mississippi River from French Canada, they were French, to the Gulf of Mexico. And because they travel the whole length of the river, they claim it for the French. And so at this time, the Mississippi River becomes French territory because these two gentlemen sailed the entire length of it and thus claim it for the French. Um, Downtown, there is a LaSalle school, there is a LaSalle street. There's also a Tonty or Des Tonty Street right near Soulard Market, and so these are this is how they're memorialized in St. Louis. Joliet has a city in Illinois named after him. That's where the state prison is. And then Marquette is obviously much more well known if you know anything about Marquette University in Chicago. That is named after this gentleman. And for Parkway, our arch rival Marquette in Rockwood is also named after this gentleman right here. So that basically is what we have for the European influences. So we start with DeSoto, then we have Joliet and Marquette, and then we end with De La Salle and Des Tonty, who claim the Mississippi River for the French. And so this you can see is their travels basically from French Canada along the Great Lakes and then down the Mississippi River, starting basically right in upper Illinois and then making their way all the way down. As far as names go in the Midwest, the Sioux language does give us some names, not very many. So the only ones that you're going to have to copy down in your notes are the ones that are listed in red. And so here are some of the Sioux names, both unused and used today. One of the unused ones is that the Sioux called the Mississippi River Natungo, which translates to Big River, and you can see why. And then they called the Missouri River Neshadsi for Muddy River. Now, even though the Mississippi is also known as the Big Muddy, the Missouri River was considered very muddy as well because it's smaller, faster, and has more junk in it. And so it was called Neshadsi, which meant Muddy River. One of the languages that, or one of the words that we do use is Neosho. If you've ever been down Highway 44 just before you hit Arkansas, one of the last cities that you will see along Highway 44 is Neosho, Missouri. And Neosho, Missouri is a great place to go floating because of the main river. And so the main river was known as Neosho, and that is a Sioux name. So you need to jot that one down. And then the other famous one is a state that borders Missouri, and that would be Nebraska, which is known, is called Nebraska because of what we call today the Flat River. And so the Flat River was called Nebraska. And so you can see basically the prefix "ne" means river, and then everything else is the first one. So Neosho and Nebraska are Sioux. So what language did we use or do we use to name most of the geographical landmarks today? Well, that would be Algonquin. And so the Algonquin language gives us most of the language names that we have today. So for instance, Mississippi translates into Big River in Algonquin. So you're going to want to jot that down. Missouri means big boat, which is for the Missouri River. It's called the big boat because you needed a bigger boat to travel on the Missouri than the Mississippi because it was smaller. That meant it was faster, and that meant that there was more junk that you could run into. And if you had a small boat, you were very likely to sink, whereas a bigger boat could handle the bumps and the bruises of the river with all the stuff in it. So Missouri, or the Missouri River, is known as Big Boat. Merrimack stands for ugly fish. I am assuming that the ugly fish that they were referring to is the ever famous and very delightable, especially when fried, catfish. Um, and if you've ever seen a catfish, they are ugly. Then you have Michigan, which means big lake. And then my favorite story that I like to tell is Chicago. Chicago is an Algonquin word, and before I tell you what it translates to, I got to kind of explain it to you. For those of you who've ever been to Chicago, you know that the Chicago River runs through the city of Chicago and eventually empties into Lake Michigan. Well, the area where the river meets the lake was a large marshy field area that grew wild garlic and onion. And so what happened was every spring the river would flood and that garlic and onion field would be flooded, and then when it dried out, all of that natural garlic and onion would rot and it would put out a putrescent smell. And the natives in that area called that putrescent smell, you guessed it, Chicago, which basically translates into skunky or stinking smell. And so Chicago literally translates into skunky or stinking smell. So in the ever battle between St. Louis and Chicago for who has the best name and why, I'm going to have to give that to St. Louis, as we are named after a French king, and Chicago is named after a putrescent smell. And so, as you can see from the map, basically geographically, St. Louis is right here. We have the Mississippi River going right here. The Missouri River would go up this way and then head up toward the northeast or the northwest. And then the Merrimack is down here in southern St. Louis area, as you can see from this little box right in here. Chicago is right up here, and this is Lake Michigan. And then I need to just briefly tell you about 3, 4, and 5. So 3, 4, and 5 are well known because of why they get started as cities. These cities start off as Catholic missions that eventually grow into cities. So a Catholic mission is sort of a headquarters where you would have missionaries live, and then they would go out and try to convert the local, in this case, local natives in this area. And so number 3 on our list was Cahokia. Cahokia starts in 1699 as a Catholic mission and then eventually grows into a city. Number 4, which was also in Illinois, is Kaskaskia. That is 1703 as a Catholic mission. And then the only one on the Missouri side, and technically the oldest city in Missouri, is St. Genevieve, which starts as a Catholic mission in 1732. So in your notes, you're going to want to write down these 3 cities and the years that they are started, and then the fact that all 3 of them have one thing in common, and that is that they all start off as Catholic missions and eventually grow into cities. Notice how St. Louis is not on this list. That is because we do not start as a Catholic mission. We have another origin, which we will be discussing later on this unit. And so that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and I hope you dig deeper into some of these legends and stories that we covered today. And I hope you enjoyed the first lesson of many more to come.